Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lessons, we're going to be discussing love in the writings of John. John is affectionately referred to as the apostle of love. He has some unique insights and expositions on love. And with the exception of Paul's 13th chapter in his first epistle to the Corinthians, the fourth chapter of John is perhaps the standard biblical text on the nature and dynamics of love. So we're going to start from there, then we're going to hop around from gospel to epistle. And these aren't an exhaustive list. We're not going to be covering everything he has to say about love, but we've arranged it and ordered it in a coherent sequence that'll hopefully make sense. Seventh verse, fourth chapter, first epistle of John. Beloved ones, let us love one another, because love is of Elohim, and everyone who loves has been born of Elohim and knows Yahweh. So the motivating factor to love is because we are children of Elohim, we belong in the same family of faith, and if he loves us, we must love each other, because love emanates from him. He expounds more fully, but that is evidence that we have been born again, and we have been admitted into the Christian community by his standard. But knowledge of Yahweh, the one who does not love does not know Yahweh, for Yahweh is love. So the more we know Yahweh, the more our capacity to love others will increase as we expand our understanding on just how much he loved, and the extents and depths that he goes is going to form some of the basis of a lot of the verses we have that come after this. But Yahweh is love. Now, it doesn't say that love is Yahweh, because Yahweh is bigger than love. It is one of his many attributes, and with every other one of his attributes, he embodies it perfectly, totally, consistently, thoroughly, so much so that it is an attribute, not a description, but an attribute is something that can be attributed to him. But the love is one of many, but he is perfectly loving, and he is our standard and example for love. By this the love of Yahweh was manifested in us, that Yahweh sent his only begotten Son into the world in order that we might live through him. So this brings to mind the more familiar, the most easily recited and quoted biblical passage, John 3:16, for Elohim so loved the world that he gave it his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have eternal life. So his gift of sending the Son to the world was our ticket to a life in heaven after him. He became temporal in order that we may become eternal. And that's a quote from St. Augustine that speaks of the condescension and the ascension. So because he came down to earth, now humanity has a God complex. We all aspire to live in heaven, to have supreme attributes, complete sovereign control over our lives and destinies, but that only gets in the way, and it's the sin of Satan and just Adam and Eve as well. But thankfully for us, divinity has a human complex, and he empathizes with us intimately in our fears because he came one of us. So he shares our same struggle. He knows all our pains. There's nothing that we can go through that he hasn't gone through. So it is a gift that leads on to life, and thus it is an act of love. So life itself and salvation are not motivated by necessity, because Elohim is a self-created, self-existent, self-sufficient, self-sustaining being. He doesn't need anyone or anything, but he created humanity out of an act of love, and he saves us from hell and damnation out of an act of love as well. So his love cannot be compromised into overlooking unrepentant sinners and sending them to their fate which they merit. But we believe in the name, and we have life through him. And this is love, not that we loved Yahweh, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be an atoning offering for our sins. So love originates and is always precipitated by Yahweh. This is the doctrine of preeminent grace, where we cannot come to him unless he first comes to us. So our love originates. He's the source of all love, and he still does live in non-believers and atheist hearts who have the capacity within them to love, and that certainly comes from him. But what's interesting, the atoning offering that signalizes death, and atonement was the sacrifice of an innocent animal for a guilty human, guilty sinner, and he became the atonement, the capital A. He became our propitiation. That word is also used in this epistle, but for our sins. So that was an act for our sins. That is a supreme act of love, that he sent his own son to be our full, final, perfect, and efficient atonement. Beloved ones, if Yahweh so loved us, we also ought to love one another. So the natural response to being loved and being awareness and having an appreciation for the fact that you are loved, then you will, if you take love for granted, you're not going to be loving towards people in your path. But when you bask in the love of him who is love, then we cannot help but love people in spite of themselves. We can have the power to even love our enemies if we are walking fully submitted, if we love as Yahweh loves. Yahweh's love is a supreme standard. He loves his enemies and his allies all the same. His love is not compromised by opposition. No one has seen Yahweh at any time. If we love one another, Elohim stays in us, and his love has been perfected in us. So because he's an invisible being, no one can look at him or behold him or otherwise know what he is like, but because he is love, when we love others, we give a visible testimony and witness that can be evangelically invited to people who want to know him. And the way that we know him is, as earlier, if you love not, then you know not, and if you love, then you know. So his love will be perfected in us. That's when we will feel him most alive. We will feel him. We will not see him, but we'll have the ironclad assurance that he is in presence when his love is being perfected in us. So he gives us the ability to go above and beyond our ordinary, the natural man, the capacity to love. And we are to love others, and in so doing, give a witness and testimony to the one who is love. The next range is 16 through 21. And we have known and believed the love that Yahweh has for us. Yahweh is love, and he who stays in love stays in Elohim, and Elohim in him. So this springs to mind the 15th verse, the analogy and the metaphor of the vine and the branches. So we stay in him. That's how we we remain fruitful in that analogy. But by the same token, I actually read that wrong. Verse 16, and we know and believe the love that Yahweh has for us. Yahweh is love, and he who stays in love stays in Elohim, and Elohim in him. So once more, he is love. He is not limited to love. He is more than love, but he is love in its perfect totality and its supreme expression and embodiment. And if we abide in him, then we will have his power and his presence and his love manifesting in us, through us, and around us. By this, love has been perfected within us, in order that we might have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. So love triumphs and conquers any fear that we have of boldness. We may approach that day with faith and confidence that we will be saved, that his love will win the day for us, that we will not be doomed into death and damnation by our own sin. So with the love that motivates his forgiveness of sins, because that is not necessary for him to do either. Everything he does and everything he is love and motivated by it. But there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear holds punishment, and he who fears has not been made perfect in love. So fear, now we are not to lose our fear of the Almighty, which is the fear which eliminates and expels all other fears. But if we fear him properly, we will have access to his love. And this is the love. So a sign and mark and indicator of spiritual maturity is love. So an immature believer's sense of fear will exceed their sense of love. That's not the end of the world. That's nothing that can't be remedied. That's not anything we shouldn't work on. But the goal and objective and aim is to get their sense of love to exceed their sense of fear. Fear is where we all began, and I personally don't think it's unethical to use fear as an evangelical ploy, because it works and it gets people where we need them to be. We need to have them at least aware of divinity, and it's natural when you're new to your sin and guilt to fear the consequences of it. But once you get deeper and deeper and walk further and further with him, and in him, then, the fear and the guilt and everything else, the anxiety will go away. We love him because he first loved us. So he is the originator, the father, the author, and the finisher of our relationship of love. He is the source of love, even in love. And those who don't love him, people who do not love Elohim still have the created capacity to love things or people. They have it within their hearts. But he's speaking of us as Christians who are beloved and know our love and love him in return. And he wants to remind us that it all began in his love. If someone says, I love Elohim and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one not loving his brother whom he has seen, how is he able to love Yahweh whom he has not seen? So he gives examples of this in the 3rd chapter. Cain was the perfect example of one who hated his literal brother, but brother in our sense is just anyone we are related to, relate with, and interact in. And so if we are hating, that is evidence that we do not love the source of love, because he will enable us to love those who hate us. And why do we go out into the world which hates us? It's because we love them. And but that is a visible witness. They have the opportunity. Within every man, woman, and child is the image of Elohim, and therefore a reflection of self. And so how can he claim to love one who is placed in his path when he can love one who is not in his sight, when he is loving one who is in his sight, not loving one who is in his sight? And we have this commandment from him, that the one loving Elohim should love his brothers too. So this reminds us of the 2 great commandments. Thou shalt love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy might, mind, soul, all their faculties and all their capacities, and thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself. In Matthew's 22nd chapter, Mark's 12th, and Luke's 10th, we read versions of that. So the command is closely connected. Now, in the range we just covered, in the book, the Epistle of John, I think the word love appears 43 times, and 32 times in the range we began with the 7th verse all the way to the 3rd verse of the 5th chapter. We're going to save that one. We're now going to follow the order and the path, hopefully in a way that makes sense. Beginning in John 13, I got to put my marker back here. 13, 34, 35, this is at the Last Supper, and he says, A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love as one another. So this commandment is old, but it is new. It is old. It is written in the book of Leviticus, to love your neighbor as yourself, and the book of Deuteronomy, to love Yahweh with all thy might, mind, heart, strength, and faculties, and all their capacities. But it is new in expression and embodiment, because he is love. He is the supreme expression and embodiment of love, and his love is the standard. So we are to love one another as I loved you. None of us can love our fellow man inasmuch as he loved us. He loves us all the same, whether we love him or not. So we have to, but that is still the standard. He calls us to the very highest standards, and he calls us to be the best because he only wants what's best for us. By this you all know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So it's not a profession of doctrine or a creed or the robes we wear, the physical clothes we wear. The mark and sign and symbol to society that we are disciples is if we love one another. It's not anything we say, it's something we do, it's something we are. So we have to be made into creatures of love, which can only happen by proxy presence of him who loves his enemies, loves the world, who is at war with him, who had been at war with the Father. He came to save the world, and the world crucified him, and through that we are saved. But this is how we are to proclaim ourselves disciples of his in the world. We are to love beyond our capacity to love. John 15, 10, 12, and 7. This is in the upper room discourse. If you keep my commandments, you shall stay in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and stay in his love. So the trick to remaining in the love and continue to rely on it and to continually be able to grasp out it and reach out to it is to obey. Obedience is the key. It is the glue which holds us all together. And we actually should have combined this elsewhere, but we're just going to move on. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So he repeats to the same audience in the same speech in the upper room that the commandment, we are commanded to love, and being commanded to love almost is a contradiction, because true love cannot be coerced or forced, but that we are to obey out of love and not by fear. So that ties into the equation. Verse 17, these I command you, so that you love one another. So once more, the commandment we are commanded to love, and what we are commanded to do goes beyond our abilities to do, but they are the highest, most exalted standards, and he calls us to be the best because he only wants what's very best with us. So the better we are, the more blessings we will have bestowed upon us. Same book, verses 14, chapter 14, beginning in verse 15. If you love me, you shall keep my commandments. So another way that we show that we love him is by obeying. Obedience should be motivated by love, not by fear. We have to do what he wants us to do and do what he calls us to do because we love him and not because we are afraid of the consequences of what might happen to us if we disobey. That should not be lost sight of, but above the overarching motivation, incentive, and factor prompting our obedience should be love. We should do it because we want to and because we love him and we trust him. It is an act of obedience because what he commands doesn't always work out to our own immediate gratification or self-interest, but we trust in him that he knows us better than we know ourselves, and what we can't see will work out to our benefit in the end beyond our abilities to imagine. Same chapter, 21st verse. He who has my commandments and keeps them is he who loves me, and he who loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I shall love him and manifest myself to him. So that's a pretty precious promise. When we love, he is there, he is present in our midst. But we have to keep and obey his commandments. We cannot claim to love him when we forsake him and reject him every time we choose to disobey, to go our own way and do our own thing. When we do something we know, the classic question, WWJD, and when we don't ask that question and we do what we want to do, then we are guilty of failure to love him, and we are not entitled to the manifestation, the access, or the presence of his loving presence, his loving self, if we do not obey. So there's a lot to obedience and to unlocking love. Verses 23 through 24. This is in response to Judas, not Iscariot, who had already left. His betrayal was in motion, literally as they spoke. Yahshua answered him, if anyone loves me, he shall keep my word, and my Father shall love him, and we shall come to him and make our stay with him. He who does not love me does not keep my words, and the words which you hear is not mine, but of the Father who sent me. So once more, the emphasis and the concentration is on keeping, obeying his words and commandments, treating his word as the word, capital T-H-E, capital W, and then we are assured of the Father's love in his presence, his manifestation. He will dwell in our hearts and exude out from us. We will love through him and by him and in him in us. But if we don't love him, that means we're just obeying ourselves, our baser instincts, the devil on our shoulders, our weaker, baser, carnal nature. That is when we fail to love him. We love ourselves, and we got to love him more than we love ourselves. Now the second book of John, the fifth and sixth verse. And now I ask you, Curia, not as though I wrote a new commandment to you, but that which we had from the beginning, that we love one another. So this gives new emphasis and dimensions on the new commandment of which we've read before. I probably should have arranged this differently, but it's too late now. But he acknowledges that it is nothing new in writing, in principle. It has been alive and embedded in the Torah, the Old Covenant, and that's that we love one another. So love was one of the defining factors of the Jewish and the Christian religion. And this is the love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, that as you have heard from the beginning, you shall walk in it. So this once more connects to obedience aspects. So in retrospect, I did combine these as coherently as I would like to. So this connects to, we've already said much of the same thing, but for here it suffices to say that walking in it is living in it. So if we live in it, then we will, walking and how we walk, the path we take, the walk we take is analogous and metaphorical to the life that we live. So we will live in it, we will walk it, it'll define our days, it'll motivate our actions and govern our attitudes. 1 John chapter 2, verse 5. Whoever keeps his word, truly the love of Elohim has been perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. So we earlier heard that word, the love being perfected, and he loves perfectly, and he embodies love perfect. And it's all its perfection, and it's all its totality. He is perfect in everything he is and everything he does. And love is something he is and something he does. He is love. And we will know that we are in him when we obey, when we in the process of obeying, that is when our love will be perfected in us. So our love is deficient at present, and we have to keep the momentum going on the action to have that love perfected in us. The more we obey, the more we will be beloved, and the more greater able we will to love and also to know divinity. An enigma wrapped in a riddle to the majority of the human race. Chapter 5, verse 3, same epistle. For this is the love for Yahweh, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not heavy. So nothing new to say about, just how a love is, every act of obedience is the demonstration of love. But his commandments are not heavy. His burden is light, and his yoke is all but air. So compared to the burdensome legalism of the Jewish religion, whereby they self-condemn themselves by resting their salvation on their ability to keep the law, none of them could. But we have the commandments of grace, and what is he commanding us? To love him. It's difficult for a lot of people, but it's not, once you get into the habit of it, it is beneficial. You are better for it. So, some people are stubborn mules and stubborn axes, and to command someone to love them, but, and we resist the notion of being commanded of anything, and love seems almost a contradiction, as we earlier explained. But it's not a lot to ask. It's for our benefit and betterment, not just the world around us. John 15:9, verse 3. Then 13. 15:9. As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love. So in the 15th chapter, he really establishes the concept of abiding in union. We have our life and sustenance from him, much in the same way that a branch cannot bear fruit or receive life apart from its connection to the vine, so too are we to him. And he is our source of sustenance and fruitfulness, but also our love. And he has loved you, and we have to stay in his love, and the implicit inference in that is that we can depart from his love. So we have to make the conscious decision to remain in his love by being there, basking in it, loving every minute, and not getting away from it. Verse 13. No one has greater love than this, that one should lay down his life for his friends. So love is not best demonstrated by profession. It does help every now and then to verbally remind the ones that you love that you do love them. But to action means a whole lot more. You will prove your love for them throughout the day by doing things without, even asking for tokens and reminders of gratitude. But to lay down a life for your friend, that's the supreme act of love, and that's the one that he filled supremely and uniquely. And so the Son demonstrated the fullness of love when he bore our sin penalty. He became mocked, humiliated, spat on. They put a crown of thorns and a robe of purple on him in mock deference to his king. So the humiliation, the physical pain, but also the spiritual separation, the most bitter moment of his agony and the exquisite agony of the passion was in that moment in time when he said, "My Father, why hast thou forsaken you?" Because at that moment he became sin, and the Father turned away from the presence. And the paradox and the reversal of it is that he becomes he became guilty, he was condemned, we were justified by it. He became exiled, we became reconciled. He died in order that we may live, ultimately. And John also says much the same thing in the epistle, the first one, chapter 3:16. A lot of this is going to sound familiar. It's just different ways of saying the same thing. 3:16. Okay. By this we have known love, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down life for the brothers. So this is the supreme demonstration and expression of love, that he laid down his life for us, and we who call his disciples ought to be similarly minded and similarly inclined to lay down our life, to sacrifice, if necessary, our life for the health of the Christian church. And this was something a lot more relevant and real to his initial audience. So every one of his apostles laid down his life for him, who laid down their life for him, and they reciprocated his love by taking the cross to taking their confession and the resurrection to the grave. And the martyr's blood was seed which spread the embryonic faith. And John 10:17-18, we're going to close on this one. Because of this, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to receive it again. So his death, he was not defeated by death. He was dead, but he is eternally alive, and he would receive it again in the resurrection. But he voluntarily laid down his life, as he expounds more fully in the next verse. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to receive it again. This commandment I have received from my Father. So part of the incarnation was the abject submission and the abject humiliation. He forsook the fullness of his divine attributes in order to pitch his tent among men. He was not omniscient. He was not omnipotent. There was somewhat of a compromise in the perfection of his attributes, but he could have summoned a legion of angels to liberate him from the temple guards who seized him and took him to his kangaroo court to be crucified. And the Roman army, he has the armies of heaven at his command and disposal, but he didn't do it. He didn't resist. He didn't summon lightning. He could have summoned lightning on the people who crucified him. He could have manipulated the elements, but he didn't do it because it was an act of love from start to finish, and he loved us perfectly, and the least we can try to do is love him as imperfectly as we are able. I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.